It was supposed to be just another ordinary flight, nothing special at all. The morning sun was bright, and the airport buzzed with the usual noise of rolling suitcases, flight announcements, and hurried footsteps. People came in with tired faces, some excited for a vacation, others stressed about business meetings. Everyone had their own little story, their own reason for flying that day. To them, it was simply one more journey in the long list of travels they had taken before. No one knew that this very flight would end up making news around the world. Inside the aircraft, passengers slowly filled the rows, the sound of seatbelts clicking, overhead bins shutting, and children giggling blended with the calm instructions from the crew. For many, this was routine. The flight attendants moved up and down the aisle, checking bags, greeting passengers, and helping the elderly find their seats. There was nothing unusual, just the typical picture of a plane getting ready to leave. Yet, in the middle of all this normal scene, a quiet tension was already building. It wasn't visible at first, not even to those sitting just a few seats away. But like a spark hiding under dry grass, it was waiting for the right moment to show itself. One passenger seemed restless. He kept adjusting his seat, asking questions again and again, and complaining about the space. The flight attendant attending that section had already been dealing with a stressful morning. She had been on back-to-back flights, with little rest, and her patience was running thin. At first, the exchange between them was nothing dramatic. A request for a different seat, a complaint about luggage space, a question about the meal service, the kind of things flight attendants hear every day. But the tone started to change. The passenger spoke a little louder, and the attendant responded a little shorter. Neither of them realized that everyone around them had started to pay attention, not openly, but with silent glances. Still, no one expected what would happen next. The air in the cabin felt heavy, though no one could explain why. Parents tried to distract their children, business travelers plugged in their headphones, and the elderly woman in the corner prayed quietly for a safe journey. The plane hadn't even taken off yet, and already there was a storm quietly forming. As the passenger raised his voice once more, frustration clearly written on his face, the flight attendant leaned closer. Her words were calm but sharp, meant to control the situation quickly. She wanted him to settle down, to stop drawing attention, but he only grew more irritated. Passengers in nearby rows exchanged looks, sensing that something unusual was brewing. Some even took out their phones, not to record, but to keep themselves ready, because nowadays, you never know when a small argument might explode into something much bigger. And that was exactly what was about to happen. With the flight still on the ground, the tension finally snapped. What had started as a normal day was seconds away from turning into a story that would travel across the globe. People were not just passengers anymore. They were about to become witnesses. Witnesses to a moment that no one could have predicted, and no one would forget. The atmosphere in the cabin was strange, almost frozen in time. A child stopped mid-sentence. A man lowered his magazine without realizing it, and the clicking sound of someone typing on a laptop paused. Everyone felt something in their gut, that something big was coming. The passenger leaned back, shaking his head, his face full of irritation. The flight attendant, equally exhausted and defensive, stood her ground. Neither wanted to step back, neither wanted to be the one to give in. The entire situation now balanced on a thin thread, and all it would take was one more wrong word, one more wrong move, for that thread to break. Somewhere in the cockpit, the pilots were running through their usual pre-flight checks, completely unaware of the tension building behind them. Outside the windows, airport staff guided other planes, trucks delivered luggage, and the world went on as normal. But inside that cabin, normal was about to disappear. It's strange how quickly things can change. One moment, you're sipping water and adjusting your seatbelt, and the next, you're holding your breath, watching an argument unfold just a few rows away. That was the feeling spreading through the cabin now. Silent eyes, hidden nervousness, and the quiet thought in everyone's head, is this really happening? The plane still hadn't taken off. The engines weren't even roaring yet. And yet, the flight was already heading into turbulence. Only this time, it wasn't in the air. It was between two people standing a few feet apart. And that was how it began. Not with a crash, not with a mechanical problem, not with anything dramatic that airlines usually prepare for. It began with a small argument, a restless passenger, and a tired attendant. It began with words, but soon, those words would turn into actions. And those actions would go far beyond this plane, beyond this airport, beyond even the country. They would echo across 8 airports in the world. They would turn into headlines that no one could ignore. But for now, at this exact moment, none of the passengers knew that. None of them could imagine what was coming. All they knew was that they were sitting in a plane that had suddenly gone very, very quiet. The hum of the air conditioning filled the cabin, but beneath that sound, tension spread like a wave. The passenger shifted in his seat, shaking his head, muttering words that weren't loud enough for everyone to hear, but strong enough to show his frustration. The flight attendant, standing only a few feet away, tried to keep her composure. Her hands tightened slightly on the seat in front of her as if holding onto patience itself. A few rows behind, a teenager nudged his mother, whispering about what was going on. The mother raised her finger to her lips, signaling him to stay quiet. Everyone had seen enough airplane stories on the internet to know that small sparks could sometimes set off storms, but nobody expected it to happen right before their eyes. The passenger leaned forward again, this time with a voice sharp enough to cut through the cabin noise. He complained about the seat, the service, and even questioned why the airline operated the way it did. His voice wasn't just about his own frustration anymore, it carried an energy that made others feel uncomfortable, almost like they were being dragged into his anger. The attendant, still professional on the surface, tried to calm him down. Her words were soft, but her tone carried a firmness that showed she wasn't going to let the situation spin out of control. But sometimes, the more you try to calm someone who is already on edge, the more they resist. That's exactly what happened here. Passengers began to glance openly now, no longer pretending to read or scroll through their phones. Some even hit the record button, holding their devices carefully on their laps. In today's world, every moment can turn into proof. Every action into a story that spreads faster than the speed of sound. The people on this flight were about to capture a moment that would go beyond anything they imagined. The passenger raised his hand slightly, not in a threatening way, but with the kind of gesture that showed he was fed up. He pointed at the seat, then at his bag in the overhead bin, then back at the attendant. His words grew sharper, louder, echoing down the narrow aisle. The attendant's patience, already stretched thin by a long day, began to crack. She leaned closer, her voice firm and direct. She wasn't going to allow the passenger to dictate the mood of the entire cabin. But in doing so, she unknowingly poured more fuel onto the fire. The passenger smirked, shaking his head as if daring her to do something. Around them, silence grew heavier. A child stopped fidgeting, an elderly man turned his hearing aid higher, and a business traveler quietly shut his laptop to watch. The plane hadn't even taken off, yet it already felt like the middle of a storm. Suddenly, the passenger's tone crossed a line. His voice carried not only frustration, but an edge that felt like an insult, an attack. It was the kind of line that changes everything, not just words anymore, but something that felt personal. The attendant's eyes narrowed for a split second. Something inside her snapped. Maybe it was exhaustion from hours of work. Maybe it was the weight of hundreds of similar complaints over the years. Or maybe it was simply the heat of the moment. Whatever it was, she reacted. Her hand moved quicker than her thoughts. In a flash, the sound echoed in the cabin, a sharp slap, startling, unexpected, unbelievable. The world inside the airplane froze. Gasps filled the air. A woman clutched her mouth, and someone whispered, "Oh my God." Phones, already recording, caught the moment clearly. In just 1 second, everything changed. The passenger's eyes widened. His face red, not just from the sting, but from the shock. He couldn't believe what had just happened in front of dozens of witnesses. For a moment, he didn't even move. He just sat there, stunned, silent, his anger replaced by disbelief. The flight attendant, realizing what she had done, stood frozen too. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her breath heavy, her mind racing. There was no way to take it back. The sound of that slap echoed far louder than any words she could ever say. The silence in the cabin was unbearable. Even the hum of the aircraft felt quieter. as if the plane itself had paused to take in what had just occurred. Every passenger felt the weight of the moment. They weren't just travelers anymore. They were eyewitnesses to something that would not stay contained within this plane. The passenger slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from the rush of adrenaline coursing through his body. He didn't shout, he didn't argue, he didn't even try to retaliate. He just pressed a single button and made a call. No one knew exactly who he was calling, but the determination in his eyes showed that it wasn't just a casual phone call. His voice, though low, carried enough power for those nearby to hear. He explained what happened in a few short words, his tone steady but urgent. 2 minutes. That's all it took. 2 minutes from the moment the call connected to when the chain reaction began. Unseen to those inside the cabin, phones buzzed across offices, radios crackled in control rooms, and messages raced through networks. The story of what had just happened wasn't locked inside this plane anymore. It was already moving faster than the flight could ever hope to. Inside the cabin, people exchanged looks of disbelief. Some shook their heads, others whispered nervously. A man whispered to his seatmate, "This is going to blow up everywhere." He didn't know how right he was. The flight attendant stepped back, her hands trembling now, the weight of her action crashing down on her shoulders. She knew there would be consequences, but she had no idea how big those consequences would be. She thought it might mean suspension, maybe losing her job. She couldn't imagine that her single action, in one heated moment, was about to cause airports across the world to shut their doors to this very airline. But that was exactly what was coming. The cabin was still heavy with silence. The kind of silence that makes every sound louder than it really is. The passenger sat frozen, holding his phone tightly. His face pale, but his voice steady as he spoke to the person on the other end. Those who sat close enough could hear bits and pieces of his words, short, clipped sentences that carried far more weight than anyone could have expected. He wasn't shouting, but his tone was serious enough to make even strangers realize this was not a casual complaint. The flight attendant stood at the aisle, her breathing uneven, her eyes darting across the passengers. Some stared back at her in shock, some with judgment, and some with fear. She wanted to say something, to explain, to apologize, to fix it, but her voice wouldn't come out. The echo of the slap still hung in the air, and no words could drown it out. To Rose's back, a man whispered to his travel partner, "That's it. This is going viral." He tilted his phone to show the recording he had captured. The screen replayed the slap in a loop, crystal clear, undeniable. The other passenger's eyes widened. "Post it," he urged. The man hesitated for only a second before pressing the upload button. The video, only a few seconds long, traveled through invisible networks. Within moments, it left the cabin and entered the world beyond. By the time the plane's door closed, thousands of strangers had already seen the slap online. Meanwhile, the call the passenger made reached someone with power. It wasn't just a friend or family member, it was someone connected to aviation authorities. Someone who could act. The details spread like fire. A passenger had been slapped, on duty, by a member of the crew. It wasn't just bad service. It was a scandal. Back at the airport, officials received alerts within minutes. In control rooms, radios crackled. Flight 780 to incident, urgent. Screens lit up with reports. Supervisors leaned over each other's desks, reading the updates in disbelief. No one wanted to believe that a crew member had crossed such a line. But the video confirmed it. The evidence wasn't hidden. It was public, unshakable, undeniable. Inside the plane, passengers felt the shift even though they couldn't see what was happening outside. They saw the flight attendants huddle near the galley, whispering in hurried voices, glancing nervously toward the back. The energy in the cabin had changed. It wasn't just tension anymore, it was anticipation. Everyone knew something big was unfolding. Even if they didn't yet know how far it would go, the passenger who had been slapped remained calm. But there was a fire in his eyes now. He put away his phone and crossed his arms, not needing to say another word. His call had done the work. It was only a matter of waiting. Then came the announcement. A soft chime echoed through the speakers, followed by the voice of the captain. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We've been informed of a situation, and we are awaiting further instructions before departure. Please remain seated." His voice tried to sound calm, but passengers could hear the edge in his tone. It wasn't the usual confident pilot's voice, it was careful, cautious. Whispers spread instantly. "They know, it's already out. We're not taking off, are we?" The passengers weren't panicking, but curiosity mixed with nervousness filled every row. Parents distracted their children with snacks. Business travelers tapped their pens anxiously, and tourists exchanged nervous laughs, all trying to mask the feeling that they were sitting in the middle of a breaking story. At that very moment, far beyond the cabin, airport authorities from different cities were making decisions. The news of the slap had spread so quickly that officials at not just one, but multiple airports began questioning whether they should allow this airline's planes to land or take off. Until the matter was resolved, the reasoning was simple. If something like this could happen, what else was going wrong inside the airline? Was it safe? Was it professional? Could passengers trust it? The questions were louder than the answers. In less than 2 hours, 8 major airports had sent notices. They wouldn't accept incoming flights from this airline. They wouldn't clear departures either. The airline's reputation had gone from shaky to radioactive in the blink of an eye. Back in the sky control rooms, airline executives scrambled, phones buzzing nonstop. What's happening? Why are we blocked? Who authorized this? Every minute brought worse news. Not 1, not 2, but 8 airports had effectively canceled them. The decision wasn't just about punishment, it was about reputation. No airport wanted to be the one allowing the scandalous airline through their gates. And all of it started from one slap. Inside the aircraft, none of the passengers knew the full scale yet, but they felt the weight of delay growing heavier. They whispered about missed connections, canceled meetings, ruined plans. But the biggest story wasn't their inconvenience, it was that they were sitting in the middle of an incident that was spiraling out of control worldwide. The flight attendant sat down now, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her eyes were glassy, her body tense. She replayed the moment in her head over and over, wondering how she had lost control, how her years of training had crumbled in 1 second. She thought of her career, her family, her dreams, all of it now hanging by a thread because of that one moment. Passengers looked at her, some with sympathy, others with cold judgment. Nobody said anything directly to her, but their eyes spoke. Some thought she was wrong, others thought the passenger had provoked her. But everyone agreed on one thing: what happened was unforgettable. The captain received the final call from ground control. His jaw tightened as he listened. The message was clear. The flight was not cleared to depart. He leaned back in his seat, his hands resting heavily on the controls, as he let out a long sigh. He knew this wasn't just a delay, it was the beginning of chaos. He picked up the intercom once again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we regret to inform you that due to unforeseen circumstances, this flight will not be departing at this time. Please remain calm as we await further instructions." Gasps and groans filled the cabin. People immediately reached for their phones, calling families, messaging colleagues, posting online. The flight that was supposed to be routine had officially turned into a headline. No one realized yet that by the end of the day, the airline itself would be fighting for survival. What had begun as a single slap had turned into a chain reaction that even the most powerful executives couldn't stop, and the passengers sitting inside that plane, witnesses to the first spark, would later say they knew from the silence in that cabin that something much bigger was coming. Asterisk phones buzzed. Screens lit up. In cities far away from the runway, people who had nothing to do with the flight suddenly found themselves watching the short clip again and again. The video wasn't long, barely 10 seconds, but those few seconds captured everything: the raised voices, the sharp movement, and the sound that made everyone flinch. A flight attendant slapping a passenger. It was raw, clear, and impossible to explain away. Within minutes, social media turned it into a storm. Comments poured in. Some defended the crew, saying passengers could be difficult. Others condemned the airline for losing control. But one thing was certain: millions of eyes were now fixed on a flight that hadn't even left the ground. At the airport, the airline's local office phones rang nonstop. Managers tried to calm reporters, while supervisors messaged the crew inside the plane. demanding updates. What happened? Is it true? Who recorded it? The flight attendant who had been at the center of it all sat frozen, unable to respond. She knew no words could undo what the world had already seen. Then came the real blow. Aviation authorities, already flooded with calls, started contacting major airports. The question was no longer about one flight, it was about the entire airline. Could they be trusted? Could they be allowed to land or take off when such an incident had just occurred? No one wanted to be responsible if things got worse. And so, in less time than it takes for most flights to cross a single country, 8 airports across different regions sent out orders, cancel permissions for this airline. Flights that were supposed to take off were halted. Planes that were already in the air were warned they might not have a place to land. The airline's operations, carefully scheduled and tightly connected, began to collapse like dominoes. Inside Flight 782, passengers had no idea of the scale outside. All they knew was that the captain's voice had grown more serious. He explained they would not be taking off yet again, repeating the same words with the same heavy tone. This time, the groans were louder, the frustration clearer. People wanted answers. Why are we still here? One man demanded. I'll miss my connection, another complained. This airline is a joke, a teenager whispered while typing furiously on his phone. But no one knew the truth, that the plane wasn't just delayed. The entire airline was being rejected by airports worldwide. A few rows back, a young woman scrolled through her phone and gasped. It's online, she whispered to her seatmate. The video. It's everywhere. She turned her screen slightly, showing the clip already gathering thousands of views. Oh no, this is serious. The news traveled row by row like wildfire. Passengers whispered, pointed, and shook their heads. Some were angry, some were nervous, some were quietly thrilled to be in the middle of a breaking story. But one thing united them all. They realized this wasn't just about them anymore. This was about the airline's future. The slapped passenger sat calmly, arms folded, watching the chaos unfold with a strange sense of quiet power. He didn't need to raise his voice anymore. His call had done what it needed to. His silence now carried more weight than any words. The flight attendant sat with her hands clasped, staring down at the floor. She could hear the whispers, feel the eyes, and sense her world slipping away. The years of training, the uniform she had once been proud to wear, the career she had built, all of it was crumbling in front of her. Not because of an accident, not because of bad luck, but because of one decision, one moment she couldn't take back. Meanwhile, the airline's headquarters turned into chaos. Executives gathered in a glass-walled room, screens showing flight maps dotted with red alerts. 8 airports, one manager shouted. We've been blocked at 8 major airports. Phones rang so loudly that the voices of the executives had to rise above the noise. Public relations scrambled to draft statements, lawyers prepared defenses, and operations managers tried to figure out where to redirect stranded flights. This is spreading too fast, one of them muttered, staring at the screen showing the viral clip. We can't control it. In the air, pilots from the same airline received instructions to hold. Their passengers grew restless, unaware that they were now part of a global story. Airlines survive on trust, and in that moment, trust in this one crumbled completely. Back on Flight 782, a passenger leaned over to her neighbor. Do you realize what's happening? This isn't just a delay. This is history. People will talk about this for years. Her neighbor nodded, his eyes glued to the screen showing the video replaying again and again. The crew, usually the calm center of any flight, looked shaken. They tried to keep their voices steady, tried to reassure passengers with practiced smiles. But the cracks showed. Everyone could feel that the airline was losing control. Outside, journalists gathered near airport terminals, waiting for statements. Reporters raised their microphones toward anyone willing to speak. Did you see what happened? Were you on the flight? How do you feel about the airline? Every comment, every photo, every video only poured more fuel onto the fire. 8 airports, 8. In the aviation world, that wasn't just unusual, it was unheard of. Airports rarely move in unison, but this time, the decision was swift and collective. The slap wasn't just a slap anymore. It had become a symbol, a warning, and a headline all at once. And for the people trapped inside Flight 782, sitting in their seats, waiting without answers, it felt surreal. They had boarded for an ordinary trip, but now they were inside a story being watched by millions. The captain made one more announcement, his voice heavier than before. Ladies and gentlemen, due to circumstances beyond our control, this flight has been officially canceled. Please remain seated as ground staff prepares to assist you. His words hit like thunder. Passengers groaned loudly now. Some cursed, some laughed bitterly, some shook their heads in disbelief. The child who had been restless earlier now cried, tired and confused. A businessman slammed his laptop shut, muttering about lost deals. Everyone felt cheated, angry, exhausted. But beyond their frustration, one thought was clear to all of them. They had just witnessed the moment. An airline's fate changed forever, and the truth was, this was only the beginning. The terminal was alive with noise. Angry passengers from canceled flights filled the halls, their voices overlapping, echoing through the airport. Some stood in long lines at the counters, demanding refunds. Others sat on the floor, scrolling furiously on their phones, reading update after update. Everyone had one question on their mind: how could one airline fall apart so quickly? The answer was already spreading. News networks around the world picked up the story within hours. On television screens inside airports, anchors spoke with raised eyebrows, showing the same viral clip on repeat. This shocking incident happened just before takeoff, one anchor said, her voice steady but dramatic. A flight attendant was caught on video slapping a passenger. Since then, 8 airports have suspended operations with this airline until further notice. In living rooms, cafes, and offices, people who had never even flown with the airline were talking about it. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others laughed at the absurdity, and many felt angry. The slap wasn't just a slap anymore, it was a symbol of mistreatment, of frustration that travelers had felt for years, but never seen so clearly. On social media, hashtags exploded. Millions of people shared their own stories of bad airline experiences. Photos of cramped seats, delayed flights, rude responses, and broken luggage filled timelines. The slap became a spark, and the spark turned into a firestorm of complaints. The airline wasn't fighting one scandal anymore, it was facing an army of angry voices, all demanding change. Inside the company's headquarters, executives huddled in a tense meeting. Screens lined the walls, showing news channels, social feeds, and live footage from airports where passengers protested. The CEO sat at the head of the table, silent, his hands pressed against his face. Every few seconds, another phone rang with bad news. Share prices falling, partners pulling away, governments demanding answers. "This is worse than we imagined," one executive whispered. "It's out of control," another added. "We need to release a statement now," someone insisted. But what could they say? An apology sounded weak, denial was impossible, and silence only made things worse. Every second of hesitation felt like another nail in the coffin. Meanwhile, the flight attendant at the center of it all was taken off the plane and escorted into a small office at the airport. She sat in the corner, her hands shaking, her face pale. She had worked for years, built her career flight by flight, only to see it vanish in a single moment. She replayed the incident over and over, wishing she could rewind time. But reality doesn't have a rewind button. And outside that small office, her face was already being broadcast worldwide. Back in the airport, passengers stranded by the cancellations vented their frustration to reporters. "I can't believe this," one woman said, clutching her luggage. "I'm supposed to be at a wedding tomorrow. Now I don't even know when I'll get there." A businessman shook his head. "I've missed my meeting already. Who's going to pay for that?" A father holding his crying child muttered, "This airline doesn't deserve to fly." Every clip, every interview, every angry word fed into the growing storm. The public wasn't just outraged, they were united. For years, people had grumbled about airlines, about poor service and disrespect. Now, they had a face to attach their anger to. One flight attendant, one slap, one video. By evening, the story dominated headlines everywhere. Passenger assaulted on flight, airline suspended across 8 airports. Viral video sparks outrage. The images were the same, The moment of the slap. Passengers gasping, phones raised in shock. Protesters even gathered outside the airline's offices, holding signs that read "Respect passengers and we deserve better." It wasn't just about one flight anymore, it was about trust, about dignity, about the treatment of travelers everywhere. Inside news studios, experts debated the incident. Aviation specialists discussed safety and professionalism. Psychologists analyzed why people react so strongly when customer service breaks down. Business analysts warned that the airline might not survive the financial hit. Every voice added to the noise, every opinion deepened the story. At the same time, rival airlines quietly seized the moment. They released statements about their own commitment to passengers, offering discounts and promotions. They saw an opportunity, and they took it. For them, the downfall of one competitor was a chance to win loyalty from frustrated travelers. But for the airline, at the center of it all, things only grew darker. Lawsuits were filed by passengers claiming emotional distress. Governments launched investigations into the company's training and safety standards. Shareholders demanded answers about how such a disaster could unfold from something so small. And through it all, the video kept spreading. Every repost, every share, every comment made it harder to recover. The slap had gone from being an isolated moment to a permanent mark in the digital world. Even if the airline tried to repair its image, the internet would never forget. On Flight 782, the passengers who had been present finally disembarked. They walked out with tired faces, dragging their bags, but many also felt a strange pride. They had been there. They had seen it with their own eyes. Some even gave interviews outside the terminal, describing the silence, the tension, the exact moment the slap happened. Their stories added more detail, more life, more emotion to the viral clip. For the passenger who had been slapped, the world now viewed him as a symbol of injustice. He was flooded with calls, messages, and requests for interviews. Some treated him as a hero, others as a victim. But either way, he had become the face of the scandal. The airline's executives, watching all of this unfold, realized the truth. They were not fighting one problem. They were fighting the power of public opinion, something stronger than any flight schedule, stronger than any marketing campaign. And that fight, once lost, is nearly impossible to win back. By the time the sun set, the slap had traveled further than any plane could. It had crossed borders, oceans, and languages. From small villages to giant cities, everyone was talking about it. The world had taken one single moment and turned it into a story that belonged to everyone. And deep down, people knew this was no longer just about one airline. It was about respect, dignity, and the way ordinary people are treated when they step into places of power. That was why the outrage was so strong. That was why the story wouldn't die down. For the airline, the storm had only just begun. The story had already filled every screen, every timeline, and every news channel. But what followed in the days after was even more powerful. The slap was no longer just an isolated moment caught on video. It had turned into a case, an investigation, and a cultural debate that reached far beyond aviation. Lawyers were the first to act. Within 24 hours, multiple lawsuits had been filed against the airline. Some came from passengers on Flight 782, claiming they had suffered emotional stress from witnessing the confrontation. Others came from advocacy groups who argued that the airline's culture encouraged disrespect toward customers. One legal team even announced live on television that they would fight to the last breath to hold the airline accountable. Government agencies quickly followed. Aviation boards demanded reports. Safety regulators opened investigations, and ministers called for hearings. In one press conference, an official said, "Airlines are entrusted with the lives and dignity of passengers. What we witnessed was a violation of that trust." His words were replayed on news channels, quoted in newspapers, and shared online, adding even more weight to the scandal. The airline tried to respond, but every statement they released backfired. Their first apology sounded cold and scripted. Their second one, blaming stressful conditions, only made people angrier. Excuses, one commentator said during a live broadcast. People don't want excuses. They want accountability. By the time the airline tried a third statement, this time announcing suspension of the flight, attendant, the damage was too deep. The public had already made up its mind. Meanwhile, the video kept circulating in fresh forms. Some edited it into short reels with dramatic music. Others slowed it down frame by frame to emphasize the moment. It appeared on comedy shows, late-night talk programs, and even cartoons. The slap had become a symbol not just of one airline's failure, but of the way ordinary people often feel powerless in front of big companies. Universities began using it as a case study in business ethics classes. Professors explained how a single action, in the wrong environment, could destroy trust built over decades. Analysts compared it to other corporate scandals, pointing out how quickly small incidents could spiral in the digital age. The slap became more than news, it became a lesson for the flight attendant herself. Life turned into a nightmare. Her face was everywhere, on news channels, in online articles, across endless memes. She was suspended immediately, but suspension wasn't the end of it. Strangers sent her messages filled with anger, others mocked her, and some even threatened her. She avoided public places, afraid someone might recognize her. What had been 1 second of anger now defined her entire life. The passenger who had been slapped became the opposite. He was invited onto television shows, offered book deals, and treated like a spokesperson for mistreated travelers. People lined up to hear his side of the story. He spoke calmly, never raising his voice, but every word he said carried the weight of someone who had been wronged in front of the world. Some called him a hero, others called him a victim, but no matter the label, he was now a household name. Back in the airports, chaos continued. With 8 airports refusing the airline, thousands of travelers were stranded. Long lines stretched across terminals, filled with exhausted families and frustrated workers. News reporters filmed scenes of people sleeping on floors, holding signs with flight numbers that would never depart. "This is bigger than a single flight," one reporter said live from a crowded terminal. "This is a crisis spreading across borders." Other airlines saw opportunity. They quickly stepped in, offering discounted seats and special rescue flights. "We believe passengers deserve respect," one competitor wrote in a statement, a clear jab at the airline under fire. Travelers, eager to leave, flocked to these alternatives. In a matter of days, the scandal not only destroyed trust, but also drove customers directly into the arms of rivals. Financial markets noticed too. The airline's stock plunged, wiping out millions in value. Investors pulled back, questioning if the company could even survive. Analysts spoke grimly on television. "This is not just a public relations issue. This is an existential threat." But perhaps the most powerful reaction came from ordinary people. In living rooms, on buses, in workplaces, people discussed what the slap meant to them. Many had their own stories of being ignored, mistreated, or disrespected by service providers. The slap became a shorthand for all those experiences. It wasn't just one flight attendant against one passenger, it was the public against an entire system. That often made them feel small. The cultural wave was undeniable. Artists painted murals of a raised hand, symbolizing defiance. Activists held rallies outside government buildings, holding banners that read, "Dignity in the Sky." Talk shows hosted debates, with some arguing for compassion toward stressed workers, and others demanding harsher punishment for the airline. The incident had transformed into a mirror, reflecting deeper frustrations in society. Even children knew about it. In playgrounds, kids reenacted the slap as a joke, while teachers shook their heads. It had entered everyday conversation, becoming part of how people describe frustration. "Don't let this turn into another slap situation," someone might say in an office meeting, and everyone would know what it meant. For the airline's leadership, the walls were closing in. Lawsuits piled higher each day. Governments threatened to revoke licenses. Investors demanded leadership changes. The CEO, once confident and untouchable, now sat quietly in boardrooms, his voice barely rising above a whisper. "We might not survive this," he admitted during one late-night call, and he wasn't wrong. Airlines can survive accidents, delays, even strikes, but they rarely survive when the public loses trust. Trust is the invisible fuel that keeps planes in the sky. And once it's gone, no amount of money can bring it back quickly. The slap, in its raw simplicity, had done what years of criticism could not. It forced an entire industry to look in the mirror. And while the airline at the center of it all fought desperately to stay alive, everyone else watched closely, waiting to see what lesson would be learned. The world had moved beyond shock now. It had entered a new phase: judgment, accountability, and reflection. The story wasn't over yet. If anything, it was only climbing higher, like a plane hitting unexpected turbulence with no clear landing in sight. Weeks had passed since the day of the slap, but the world had not moved on. The clip was still replayed on news channels, still circulating on social media, still whispered about in airports by travelers waiting to board their flights. What had started inside a single cabin had grown into something much bigger, an event that forced everyone to rethink the way people were treated in the sky. The airline itself was barely recognizable. Once proud of its sleek branding and wide routes, it now stood battered and weak. 8 airports still refused to open their gates to its flights. Several more considered joining them. Its offices, once buzzing with plans for expansion, now echoed with silence as employees worried about losing their jobs. The company's stock, which had already crashed, now seemed stuck in freefall. Executives tried to rebuild the brand with desperate measures. They fired senior managers, launched new training programs, and promised reforms. They spoke at press conferences, using words like dignity, safety, and respect. But the public didn't clap. Instead, they crossed their arms, waiting for proof, waiting for real change. For the flight attendant, the aftermath was a life turned upside down. She no longer wore the uniform that had once been her pride. Instead, she sat at home, avoiding the outside world, knowing her face had become infamous. Some sympathized with her, arguing she had been under extreme pressure, but far more condemned her. Strangers online used her as the example of what happens when workers lose their humanity. She wasn't just a person anymore, she was a symbol. And symbols don't fade easily. The passenger she had slapped lived a very different reality. He gave interviews across multiple countries, each one watched by millions. He told his story calmly, often repeating the same sentence: "No one deserves to be disrespected like that." His words struck a chord, especially with people who had felt powerless in their own lives. Too many. He wasn't just a man who got slapped, he was a reminder that ordinary people deserve respect, no matter where they are. Airlines around the world took notice. Training programs were updated. Workshops on conflict management became mandatory. Executives reminded their crews to handle passengers with care, even under pressure. No one wanted to be the next headline, the next viral clip. The slap had turned into a warning for the entire industry. But the cultural impact went even further. The slap became part of everyday language, a phrase used in offices, classrooms, and homes. When someone felt disrespected or ignored, they would say, "Don't treat me like I'm on that flight." Everyone knew what it meant. The incident had become shorthand for standing up against mistreatment. Meanwhile, in airports, travelers behaved differently too. They carried themselves with more awareness, some even recording small interactions with crew members, just in case. The trust between airlines and passengers had been shaken, and trust, once cracked, takes years to repair. In parliaments and government halls, lawmakers debated stricter passenger rights. New regulations were proposed, including stronger protections for customers, stricter penalties for airlines, and better systems for complaints. All of it traced back to one video, one slap, one flight that never took off. Inside classrooms, business students studied the incident as a case of corporate collapse. Professors asked, what could have been done differently? Students discussed the dangers of stress, the importance of leadership, and the unstoppable force of social media. They learned that in today's world, reputation can vanish in seconds. But beyond the politics, the business, and the media frenzy, there were the people. Ordinary people who had been on that flight. They lived with the memory of that silence in the cabin, the sound that broke it, and the chain reaction that followed. Some still told the story at family dinners. Others posted their experiences online. Each one had their own angle, their own emotions, but all agreed they had been witnesses to something history would not forget. The story of the slap wasn't just about failure, it was also about lessons. It showed how fragile respect can be, how quickly trust can crumble, and how small actions can create massive consequences. It reminded people that every word, every gesture, every moment matters. For the airline, survival remained uncertain. They cut routes, sold aircraft, and tried to slowly win back passengers. Some customers forgave them, many did not. Competitors grew stronger, filling the gap they left behind. Even years later, the company's name carried the weight of the scandal, never able to fully escape it. And for society, the slap lived on as a reminder that power without respect is dangerous. People carried that lesson with them into their own lives, in workplaces, schools, and communities. They realized how important it was to stay calm, to stay human, even in moments of frustration. Because 1 second of anger can create waves that reach far beyond imagination. The flight that never left the ground had still managed to travel the world, not through the sky, but through screens, voices, and hearts. It had forced change, sparked conversations, and left a permanent mark. In the end, the story wasn't about a single person, a single airline, or even a single industry. It was about everyone, about dignity, respect, and the fragile threads that hold society together. 1 call, 2 minutes, 8 airports, and millions of lives touched. That was the legacy of the slap,